interesting revelation or fact found anywhere in those 6 verses of chapter 25. There is no phenomenal theology in chapter 25. Did you notice that? It's just like the cheapest answer anybody could throw back. So I think it's funny. Then you have verse 7, and this is just solid science. It says, He stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth, he's speaking about God, hangs the earth on... I think it is interesting. Somebody's going to Cody, you idiot. And I may be walking into a trap. But the theory of relativity is an interesting thing, because if you've ever seen people describe the theory of relativity, they talk about how gravity is involved in the theory of relativity. Has anybody ever seen the thing where they take a big spandexy thing and they put it like over a hula hoop and put a heavy weight in the middle of it, and then they fling marbles around it and the marbles spiral down to the thing, and they talk about this is what causes gravity to mass, is because there is something that we don't see, that space has some kind of matter-ish type element to it that is bending, and so then you get the orbiting of all these things because they're all trapped around this thing. There's a problem with that whole thing in the first place, is because this thing where you have a weight on a sheet requires a plane in the first place. Right? Requires a plane for that effect to happen. And then you get weird and interesting things like Saturn, which has rings that go contrary to the plane of the universe. Should the rings on Saturn be traveling contrary to the plane of the universe if all that other stuff is legit? There's something weird about that. I'm not going to go the extra mile to pretend that I know a whole lot about something I don't know a whole lot about. But there's some phenomenally beautiful that the one planet we've got that's got rings around it, the rings are going the wrong direction.
There's also a couple of planets that are spinning in the opposite direction.
Right. Shouldn't be going the direction they're going. And on top of that, now people also have the argument that the entire universe is traveling, and so that's why things are doing what they're doing. But even with that, then, if that was the case, when we do a solar system model, we put all the planets on the same plane. Even if that were the case, the theory of relativity is the way they describe it, everything would actually be curving down towards whatever the sun is. Now everything is gravitating toward the sun, but everything isn't gravitating and moving down away from other, longitude, latitude, I don't know what you call that. Other dimensions, not in like a, you know what I'm saying. Anyways, there are some major problems with that. And I'll just say it's interesting because Job says he hangs the earth on, not the theory of relativity, on nothing. It's just an interesting thing. Einstein is a brilliant guy. I'm not trying to, and he's a God-fearing guy too, so I'm not trying to pick at Einstein or anything. I'm just saying the idea that you're going to figure out science better than God will plague you if you believe it, right? You're going to be wrong. Verse 12. By this he stilled the sea, by his understanding he shattered Rahab, and we talked about, Rahab came up last time, and we did a little bit of a study on Rahab after everybody had left, and this is not the Rahab that we had heard of in Jericho. This is Rahab in regard to a aquatic dinosaur. Very large aquatic dinosaur is the gist of it. So, yeah, an ancient aquatic dinosaur. Chapter 27. Again, Job took up his discourse and said, As God lives, who's taken away my right, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter, as long as breath is in me. And right off the bat, guess what? Again, I'm thinking to myself, calm down, Job. Dial it back, brother. And the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood. And again, notice how Job starts off angry, and he's like, I gotta bring it back, I gotta get myself under control. And he does it so beautifully. So, the Spirit of God is in my nostrils. My lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast to my righteousness. I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. So, when I was in California, I pulled up to a red light, and I had a 2001 Dodge Ram, and there was a guy in a little sports car next to me, and when we took off, and my Dodge Ram was very loud just because it was had to cut muffler, and it was loud, and it was like 8 gallons to the mile, and it was ridiculous. It was a mess as far as fuel consumption goes. But I took off and right, big old monster truck thing, and I took off and it's loud and ridiculous. And there's a mall and there's a diner in the corner of the mall parking lot. And as we took off from the light, when the light turned green, we took off. I got to 35 miles an hour, which was the miles per hour on that street, and that other car just continued to shoot off. There was a cop car that was behind the Denny's or something like that, and he came and he pulled me over because the other guy was already gone. He did not go 35 miles an hour, he took off. So he pulled me over and he gave me a ticket. And I went to court, and by the time I got to court, the ticket had evolved into saying that I ran the red light. And I told the public defender, I said, that's easy. I was at the red light. I know what I did. I was at the red light. And when the light turned green, we both took off. I hit the accelerator as hard as I could. I never broke traction because my truck can't break traction, so good luck with that. But I did take off as fast as I could, and he continued on. I met the speed limit, and I started going the speed limit. It was a young and dumb, foolish silliness. I admit that, right? So I shouldn't have been doing that. But I didn't run the red light, and so the guy said, so I told him I was going to plead not guilty to it. They went back, and I actually heard my public defender in the lobby talking to another lawyer, and the two of them were talking about what cases they were going to trade with each other. Oh, I think I can get this guy to plead no contest to that. You go ahead and get this guy. I can't get this guy. Can you give me that case, and I'll give you this case. I will let you win that case. You let me win this case. Was the conversation going on with the lawyers in the hallway? They were literally bargaining cases with each other, regardless of what the facts were. And I went to my lawyer, and she bargained my case away. And I went to my lawyer, and I said, easy problem to solve. It is at a mall. Surely there's tons of lights. You go ahead and do a subpoena on the, and we had a camera system there. I said, you subpoena the photos from the lights that night, and you will find that when the light is red, I am stopped at it. When it's green, I'm driving. And the case dwindled down into, it ended up becoming an infraction, but it was a 2-point infraction. Bottom line is, I got tired of dealing with it. I was like, fine, I'll plead no contest. Got this 2-point infraction that then caused my insurance rates to go up and all this other kind of stuff, and everything they continued to charge me with was stuff that I knew that I hadn't done. And I just was like, the trouble that they're driving me through is not worth keep going to court, keep going to court, keep going to court until they get something to stick. That's a stupid way of doing business. I just want to point out, Job would have never agreed to a plea bargain. Job would have never agreed to a plea bargain. And I think it's right, no matter what it costs the court, or what it costs yourself, or even if you end up being found guilty. If you didn't do a thing, don't agree to a plea. No matter what, and you think, oh, it's just an infraction. And that's what they did. They came back to me, and they took it from, I don't know, this thing and this thing and this thing, and then they brought it down to where it wasn't even a criminal anything. It was just an infraction. It was like they tried to get it down to the dumbest thing it was, just so that the ticket had to do something, so they could trade the case away and this and that. I shouldn't have agreed to that. But they just exhausted me with coming back to court. I don't know what the deal is either, but it doesn't seem right to me. It seems like whatever the ticket was written up as is what you ought to go to court on, and if that's not what you did, you shouldn't be able to be prosecuted, period. Like, it shouldn't be that the things change, that the charges change as you go on. That's weird to me. That doesn't make sense. But never accept a plea. Either plead guilty or plead innocent. If you're guilty, plead guilty. If you're innocent, plead innocent. Right? So, verse 12. He goes on to say stuff, and essentially he says to his friends, he says, why have you become altogether vain? So he's essentially saying, what is going on? What happened to you guys? You guys are supposed to be my friends, and he spent his whole time just trashing me. What is going on? Right? Chapter 28, verses 12 to 23. Does it seem right? 12 to 13. Sorry. Fix that to 12 to 13. I apologize. But where shall wisdom be found? This is Job speaking. Where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the land of the living. He's pointing out that the value of wisdom is always underestimated. The value of wisdom is always underestimated. He says man does not know its worth. And he's not talking about only the dumb people. He's saying we do not understand how valuable wisdom is. He says the deep says it's not in me. The sea says it's not with me. It cannot be bought for gold, and silver cannot be weighed at its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels and fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral and crystal, because that stuff's just too cheap, right? The price of wisdom is above pearls. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. He's saying there is nothing more valuable than what?
Wisdom.
Amen. Amen. And it's interesting because we went to McDonald's the other day, and there was one gal at one window, and she was aggravated and annoyed, and she was probably in her 30s, and she was like just frustrated that she had to be working at McDonald's. And we tried to keep peace with her, to get through the line, and we pull up to the second, there's two windows, we pull up to the second window of the drive-thru, and there was this young kid that if you were being real generous, you might imagine him at being 16. But he seemed like he was probably even younger than that. And I asked him, came to the window, how are you doing? Glad to have you. Your food's right here. Gave me all this stuff and just was phenomenal. Spotless employee. And I asked him, I said, is this your first job? And he said, yes. And I said, you are going to do excellent. I mean, just in the brief interaction at the window, you could tell that he had a mentality that was going to take him very far. And he was crazy young. Right? And when we left the drive-thru, I told my kids, I said, which do you think, when I owned my tile business, which do you think I would have been more likely to hire? The gal who's all upset in her 30s, who has been around long enough to have wisdom, or this kid who's polite and courteous and excited to help you? Guess which one would have got the job? The kid, who hadn't had the time to build the wisdom that she's had the time to build, but guess who's got more of it? The kid, right? Wisdom is far more valuable than anything else, and if you can, I've heard of multi-million-dollar companies where the bosses of those companies will go out and they'll look for people who've got the stuff you can't train people to get. Because the other stuff you can train. If they don't know how to do the system or don't know how to do the project, but if you can find a person who's got a head on their shoulders that has got wisdom, you can teach them the other stuff. But if a person refuses to digest wisdom, guess what? Whatever else you teach them will be worthless. So, wisdom, there's nothing more valuable than wisdom. Verse 20, from where then does wisdom come? Great question for the inquiring mind. Where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all the living, concealed from the birds of the air. Abaddon and death say, we have heard a rumor of it with our ears. We heard it somewhere, but we don't know. It's interesting because the idea is that everyone wishes they had wisdom, but few go to the source to find it. People imagine that, well, if I get wise, it's going to be a coincidence. I will tell you, that's why people don't got wisdom. Wisdom does not happen by accident.
But have you noticed the more you learn, the more you realize how little you really know?
So, speaking of Einstein, as we spoke of earlier, he described knowledge as being a sphere. And our knowledge, the outside of the sphere, is what we know we don't know. And the more we know, that sphere grows. And the outside of that, now we know there's more that we don't know.
Exactly.
And so the sphere grows and grows, and the bigger our source of knowledge grows, the bigger we realize there is a lot we don't know. Right? The more we realize there's a lot we don't know. Yeah. So check out verse 23. God understands the way to it, and He knows its place. For He looks to the ends of the earth, and He sees everything under the heavens. When He gave to the wind its weight, and apportioned the waters by measure, when He made a decree for the rain and the way of the lightning for the thunder, then He saw it, and He decreed it, established it, and searched it out. And He said to man, behold and fear the Lord. That is nifty. Is that what it says? It says that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding. This is why whatever leaders that you have, whether it be political or even in your job or whatever, or your business, or even in your, what are the communities, CCRs, right, where people set up whatever their community environment's going to be, if we're going to be able to walk dogs or have trees over 8 feet or whatever this kind of stuff is. Whatever your society is where there is leadership involved, If your leader has fear of God, they'll be able to do far more than anybody else, because they'll go to God for thinking what is right and what is just and what is fair. And this is why, by the way, socialism hasn't worked and communism hasn't worked. Because socialism and communism depends on the moral standards of men for success. It requires, for communism to be successful, it requires the elite standards of men, right, to not cheat anybody. Guess what men do? Cheat people. For a republic to work, I shouldn't say for a republic, because there's a lot of republics that don't work. For our republic to work, the reason our republic has worked and worked so well is because our founding fathers had a very high regard for, guess what? God. That's the reason why even people can't replicate our republic. Because they're trying to replicate the thing without the thing that made it powerful, which was the reverence for God. It doesn't work. This republic that we're in will die when the people stop having reverence for God. This republic isn't vulnerable to that. God understands the way to wisdom and He establishes it, right? So, the source is God. This is the most valuable resource in all of creation, that is wisdom. And the wisdom begins with the fear of God, right? Chapter 29. We're going to move quick to finish, but we don't have a lot to go, so hang in there, guys. I'm sorry. I know I just realized I'm 10 minutes over, so I apologize. Chapter 29. Verse 2 through 4. Oh, that I were as the months of old, as in the days of when God watched over me, when His lamp shone upon my head, and by His light I walked through darkness, as I was in my prime. So Job imagines that his best days are behind him. Right? He imagines that his best days are behind him. He says, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, and when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were all around me, when my steps were washed with butter, and the rock poured out for me streams of oil. He's saying there was a time when I couldn't do anything I touched, it wouldn't go wrong. Right? But guess what? Job thinks God has done what?
Abandoned him.
You came up with the same answer I got. Job thinks that God has abandoned him. Verse 12. He says, I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had no one to help them. The blessing of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. Does this sound familiar to you? Maybe James? True religion is this. Take care of widows and orphans and keep yourself from being corrupted by the world. Guess what he's talking about here? That. He understood it before James wrote it. Right? But this goes to show that Job was a philanthropist. Do you know what the word philanthropist means? It comes from the Greek word phileo.
Phil means
Love. What kind of love? There's 7 different types of love. I believe there's 7 different types of love in Greek. What kind of love is phileo? It's brotherly love. It's the love one brother has for another. And so a philanthropist is someone who loves their fellow man. That's what a philanthropist is. And by the way, when I've filled out different things and it says, what do you do? I've put on some things, I'm a philanthropist. I love people, right? That's what I do. Job was a philanthropist, right? Verse 21, men listened to me and I waited. Men listened to me and waited and kept silent for my counsel. After I spoke, they did not speak again, and my word dropped upon them. They waited for me as for rain. They opened their mouths as for the spring rain. I smiled on them, and they had no confidence. When they had no confidence, and the light of my face they did not cast down. I chose their way and sat as chief. That is, I told them what to do on things, right? And I lived among them as a king among his troops, like one who comforts mourners. He is not, I just want to point out, he's not being narcissistic and egotistical. He's stating the facts. I help people, and people came to me for help. But there's nothing narcissistic about saying I was helpful to people and people listen to me, and now that I'm here, my body is poisoned essentially. Guess how many people want to come to him for help?
No.
They're just not interested, right? So people once had a high regard for the words of Job. And he's pointing out, if they once felt that way, guess what? What does that mean currently?
They don't anymore.
They don't anymore, right? So, chapter 30, verse 1, but now they what? Now they laugh at me. Men who are younger than I. They ought to have respect just because I'm their elder, but it says men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained. They had fathers who were scumbags. And the sons of scumbags would come over and say, you done. Right? Whose fathers I have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. Right? What could I gain from their strength of their hands? The idea is the wicked mock when the righteous are wounded. The wicked mock when the righteous are wounded. Through want and hunger they gnaw the dry ground. By night, in waste and desolation, they pick saltwort and leaves of bushes and the roots of the broom tree for their food. They're eating garbage, right? They're driven out from the human company. They shout after them as after a thief. In the gullies and the torrents, they must dwell in holes of the earth and rocks, among the bushes, they bray under the nettles. They huddle together. What's a nettle? You guys know what a nettle is? Nettle. What do nettles have on them? Needles. Nettles are terrible. It's basically everything that grows in Arizona, right?
Stickers.
A senseless, a nameless brood. They have been whipped out of the land, and now I have become their song. I am a byword to them. Right? And so, he's saying these lousy scoundrels that are up to no good, that they hide in all the shadows, they stay in all the worst places, they're now the dogs that are attacking me. Right? Those dogs now attack Job. And then verse 24, yet does not one in a heap of ruin stretch out his hand, and in his disaster cry for help? Did I not weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But when I hoped for good, evil came, and when I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil, and never still days of affliction come to meet me. I go about darkened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly, and I cry for help. I'm the brother of jackals and the companions of ostriches. What do ostriches do?
Hide your head in the sand.
Stick their head in the sand, right? Absolutely. What do jackals do?
Wow.
Right. They laugh and they bite and they tear and they travel in a pack, but they're not really a pack animal. If one jackal gets hurt, what do the other jackals do? Right. There's no actual loyalty there. My skin turns black and falls from me. All my bones burn with heat. My lyres turn to mourning. My pipe to the voice of those who weep. And he's saying, I'm asking for help, but I am ignored. See how Job feels, right? So, that brings us to Job chapter 31. And things are going to get interesting as we proceed from here. Because you're going to meet very soon, next class, you're going to meet a guy that you have not met yet in the book of Job. And he is an exciting guy. So, we'll talk about that as we go. Thank you so much for being here. Do not forget that September 12th is the 101st Bible 101. And if you are here in person, get the word out. If you're here in person, you'll be able to sign up to get a Bible 101 t-shirt. And if you are here online on that day, you'll be able to put your name in with your shirt size during that hour. And if you get your name in with your shirt size during that hour, then you will receive we will send you a Bible 101 shirt. It's going to be awesome. So, it's going to be amazing. Let's go to God in prayer. Kelly, you want to lead us?
Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for all the blessings. Thank you for sending us Cody to impart your word and help us to keep your word in us and through our example make it known to our brothers and people that need you. Keep our families safe as they travel today and throughout this weekend, and bring back those that are traveling far away from home back safely to us. That's in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you guys for being here. We got through like
Have you talked to
9
Stella
chapters.
this
Yeah,
week?
we haven't. I just
We did take a little extra time. But we got through 9 in 10 chapters.